Hello, Trinity Episcopal Church. It's Tuesday, May the 19th, 2020, and this is my weekly check-in and meditation. So just a few announcements before we begin. I want to thank Rick Worth for agreeing to be interviewed last week for this midweek check-in. I thought it was a wonderful interview, and I have actually watched it twice. So if you have people that you want me to interview, either inside the parish or outside the parish, please let me know. My email address is rector@trinitycovington.org, rector@trinitycovington.org. I also want to thank Shannon Gemeinhardt and the youth for the service last Sunday. I thought it was really wonderful. Great to see children who have grown up in the past couple months, and some of them I almost didn't recognize. I also had the experience of staying home as you did last week, and I'll be talking more about that in my sermon on Sunday. The principal topic of my sermon on Sunday is going to be grief, the grief that we're all experiencing about our lives changing so much in this COVID-19 time, and especially the grief we feel of not being able to gather at Trinity. And I just want to give you a teaser. I'm going to use a quote from the poet Mark Doty. And he says, "Grief may be the long aftermath of love, the internal work of knowing, holding, and more fully valuing what we have lost." So grief may be the long aftermath of love, the internal work of knowing, holding, and more fully valuing what we have lost. So I thought it's a wonderful quote, and you'll hear more about it on Sunday. For all of you who have been faithful in giving to Trinity, I thank you very much. Again, if you're giving by check, just old-fashioned check, and mailing it in, we can provide you with a series of self-addressed stamped envelopes that we will send you a stack, and then all you have to do is put your check in and mail it back. You don't have to go to the post office to find stamps. You don't have to go to to Kroger or the Office Depot to find envelopes, and that will make your giving a lot easier. And I'll also be doing a short tutorial sometime during the week. I'll be showing it on Sunday, I think, on how to give online if that's an option for you. The last thing that I want to do is just introduce a new segment from time to time. What I'm reading in my non-school life time. So this is actually related to COVID-19, but it's kind of historical. So I'm reading this book called Light, Air, and Openness. It's about architecture, modern architecture between the wars, and it talks all about the need for hygiene and purity and how that gets reflected in architecture. It's a wonderful book. I'm only about 4 chapters in. I've probably got 6 or 7 more, but pretty well written for an academic book. If anybody wants to borrow it, please let me know and I can just drop it off for you. So my main topic today is really to talk about morning prayer, the service that we're now doing online. And it's not a new invention in the Episcopal Church. It's been around a really long time. And it was historically for centuries, it was the principal service in most Episcopal churches and Anglican churches as well. So morning prayer comes about in the mid-16th century as the Anglican Church is being formed. And it comes out of the monastic tradition. So still in monasteries and convents today, monks and nuns will gather to pray 7 times a day. And so the earliest prayer book took those 7 services and made them into 2. There was morning prayer on one end and evening prayer on the other. So those 7 services became those 2 services, and that's still true today. We still have morning prayer and evening prayer in the prayer book, and but that was only in the mid 16th century. If we go back to the Bible, and this is important, in the book of Acts, which we've been reading through, the principal act of worship for those early Christians was the Eucharist. They didn't have morning prayer. Jewish tradition had a series of prayers, but for the early Christians, Eucharist was the most important service, the celebration of Holy Communion. And so that was true for the first 1,500 years. Even with the split between the Eastern Orthodox Church and what became the Roman Catholic Church. The Eucharist was the principal thing. So when the Anglican Church was founded, it was a hybrid between the Protestant churches and then the Roman Catholic Church. And so they introduced this idea then of having a service without Holy Eucharist. Morning prayer was the principal service and remained so, as I said, for centuries. What changed about that then was what happened in the mid-19th century and the mid-20th century. And there were 2 movements that went on. There was the Anglo-Catholic movement, that is the recovery of earlier Catholic practices that came into the Anglican and the Episcopal Church. When we discovered that we didn't have to react against Rome, we could take the best of what they had and incorporate it into our tradition. So, for example, the seminary to which I went, the General Theological Seminary in New York City, was founded as an Anglo-Catholic seminary that took the best then of what the Roman Catholic Church was doing and incorporated it into its common life and taught then students that. So the chapel was built not just to house morning prayer in the monastic style, but also for the daily celebration of the Eucharist. So that went on in the mid-19th century and then began to influence the Episcopal Church, so that in the 1928 prayer book, morning Eucharist became not the norm every week, but became celebrated much more frequently. So, for example, when I was a child growing up in the 1970s, we had, at the 8 o'clock service, we had Eucharist every Sunday, and then at the later services, it was celebrated twice a month with morning prayer the other 2 Sundays. So that's the norm that I grew up in. And then what happened was Vatican II came along, and that was a result of many years of study, and that really moved churches like the Episcopal Church to have the Eucharist be the principal celebration on Sunday mornings. And that's what we've been doing for 50 years, is having the Eucharist as the principal celebration on Sunday morning. And so morning prayer went by the wayside a little bit. It was still celebrated privately on a daily basis for many people, and it was also celebrated as a midweek service. We do it on Tuesdays at Trinity every Tuesday at 9:15. You're more than welcome to come. The staff and a couple of other people gather every Tuesday to do that. So we have to think then about morning prayer, since we're celebrating it now weekly, not as less than Eucharist, but it's just different from. It's like having children, right? I don't have any children, but I was a child. And, you say, I was told as a child that my parents didn't love me any less than my brother, they just loved me differently. So think about morning prayer in that way, that we don't love it any less, we just love it differently. And so it has a long and rich tradition. We're not making it up as we go along. We're, in fact, joining decades and centuries of people in that tradition. And this is really a time, I think, to celebrate and to explore the richness of morning prayer, and especially the music that went along with it, because, again, for centuries, it was the principal celebration. And so lots of music has been written to go with morning prayer. I think we can experiment with bringing other resources into the structure of morning prayer. We don't always need to use the prayer book or other supplementary books that we have from the Episcopal Church. And I think this is really a time for creativity in worship. And so we'll be exploring that over the coming months. I think that's going to be very exciting, even though we're not going to be able to gather. And I know how frustrating that is. I have firsthand experience now about not being able to gather. But we can do the best we can with the resources we have, and we have plenty of those. So that's my meditation for today, just a brief thing about morning prayer and some announcements. If there's anything that you want me to talk about, please let me know. I'm happy to entertain any topic. My email address, once again, is rector@trinitycovington.org, rector@trinitycovington.org, and I'll see you in church.